If you're a little down and having a bad day, you should 100% play Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. The game is a pure joy and just plain fun, on top of being downright gorgeous and a massive technical achievement by Insomniac and Sony. From the beautiful visuals to insanely fun combat to creative set pieces, Rift Apart is arguably the best next-gen PS5 game in the console's young life cycle. Some of you might know me as Ghost Riposte from my Soulsborne channel, but I welcome you to Royal Press Gaming, as I like all kinds of games and needed another place to talk about them. Just for some context, I didn't grow up with Ratchet and Clank, although after playing the last two entries, I really wish I had. These games must hold epic amounts of nostalgia for those of you that have been playing since the original entry on the PlayStation 2 way back in 2002. Anyways, I just wanted to mention that the 2016 remake, which I absolutely loved, was my first experience. At the time, it wasn't an overwhelming story, complex combat, or game-changing mechanics that sold me almost immediately, but just how easy it was to pick up, play, and have a good time. It's just plain fun. I'm just as guilty of it as anyone, but I think sometimes we lose the sense of pure enjoyment and fun that made us begin to game as kids in the first place. Especially as we get older, or even if you're younger and having a tough time, sometimes you just need to smile and have fun, and I think it's almost impossible to play Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart and not have a blast. From the bright and vibrant colors, to the spectacular lighting system, to the nearly instantaneous changes between dimensions showcasing entirely different levels in mere seconds, the full power of the PlayStation 5's hardware was truly on display here, and you just marvel at the possibilities from here as we are still only 7 months into the console's life cycle, with many players finding it easier to catch a Mew on Pokemon Blue or Red than to find a PS5. My absolute favorite part of the game has to be the chaotic combat. The more enemies running all over the place, the better. Ratchet and Clank masters the art of chaotic combat in the best possible way. So many games get this wrong, where the sheer amount of enemies don't feel fun, but just unfair. Insomniac does a great job of including a lot of enemies, but balancing out their aggressiveness and attack styles to make the gameplay still enjoyable. The style of changing weapons via the weapon wheel gives you the opportunity to choose from literally every weapon in your arsenal, and coming up with different combinations is endless fun. My personal favorite is sending someone back to the NES via the Pixelizer, followed by evaporating them with the Negatron Collider, which is certainly one of the most OP weapons in the game. I know some people were disappointed with the weapon variety, but I found there to be more than enough unique weapons to have fun with, including the Apocalypse Glove, which, spamming all 5 rounds of robots to run around the arena and attack enemies, was always hilarious and never got old. Again, I have only played Rift Apart and the recent remake, so perhaps prior games had a more unique variety. I know I missed my personal favorite from the remake, the Proton Drum, which I always disperse to begin battle. Being a massive Demon's Souls fan, I totally understand a new player complaining about how convoluted upgrading a weapon can be, and I gotta tell you, the simplicity of which Ratchet and Clank handled the system was a nice change of pace and suited the game very well. With the recurring theme of fun, one of the best parts of the game is surely the grind rails, especially as you rack up combos on unforgettable set pieces deeper into the game, including jumping from rail to rail, wall running, back to the rail, into a rift, back on the rail. These sequences are placed at perfect times throughout the game as well. In some of these sequences, I really felt like the developers were just plain showing off. Insomniac does a brilliant job of mixing up combat, story, puzzles, exploration, and set pieces. Just when combat feels a little monotonous with Ratchet and Rivet, here comes a puzzle with Clank or Kit. Just when those feel overdone, here comes a beautifully executed set piece. Add in a couple of side missions or arena challenges, and you have a really nice cycle of play that doesn't overstay its welcome. One addition that could go either way for people are the minigames with Glitch, where you enter a computer as a robot spider to kill viruses. Personally, I had fun with the first couple, but once the novelty wore off, I felt like they killed my momentum a couple of times later in the game. In fairness, I believe one of the challenges laid on was optional. I'd be interested to know down below whether you guys enjoyed the inclusion of this gameplay or not. I wasn't sure what to make of the shared arsenal between Ratchet and Rivet, but I think for the pacing and flow of the game, it was the right choice. I thought maybe Ratchet and Rivet might each have their own unique weapons, or even Ratchet might have a special move and Rivet another. But other than the wrench and hammer, their combat is virtually identical. I was hoping their combat might be a little more distinguished, but perhaps the game would have felt too disjointed having to constantly switch back and forth between arsenals. In terms of actual movement, I love the implementation of the Phantom Dash, giving the player a few iframes to dodge through laser beams and other attacks. Maybe it's my love of Soulsborne games, but this always felt buttery smooth to me and felt great to time properly. This also leads to a lot of really fun traversal sequences involving double jumping, dashing, perhaps a grapple hook launcher to a wall run, and another double jump and dash. While not tremendously difficult, this sort of platforming always felt super satisfying to pull off. I will say I did notice a couple of times almost being pulled down unfairly by gravity when trying to double jump between platforms, but I think this is due to the timing of the double jump being more on the way up of the first jump rather than at the apex of the leap. That's just a small nitpick though, as overall movement felt fantastic. I always perhaps miss having a lock-on function, but it's probably not totally necessary for this type of combat and perhaps wouldn't even make sense during the fights with 10 to 20 enemies in your vision at the same time. In addition to all of the fantastic combat and traversal of Ratchet and Rivet, we of course had the puzzle sections for Clank, which in Rift Apart were in their own distinct areas, basically used in storyline as a way to describe dimensionality as well. The puzzles were probably not my favorite part of the game, but I think they worked really well in terms of breaking up the gameplay and keeping everything fresh. I think 10 straight hours of only combat would have gotten stale without the many other facets of gameplay that Insomniac fit in. The puzzles aren't overly difficult, but they are created just to the extent that they are satisfying to complete. One minor critique I had as well was the variety in enemy design. Many of the enemies and even boss fights were redone, and defining a boss fight as anytime a health bar starting at 100% along with the enemy name appearing at the top of the screen, I honestly barely remember one from the next. I felt like I fought this particular robot at least 10 times, and his moveset never seemed to change in any dramatic fashion. I know Ratchet and Clank isn't a series built upon grand boss encounters, but a little variety would have been nice. Again, it recurs multiple times, but I did enjoy the massive centipede robot fight, especially the initial encounter where you ramp up onto its back and then eventually fight him on land, where he is pretty well balanced and has a nice variety of moves. I thought this boss was really well done in the context of the game. My last critique is one that may be controversial. While I know many of you found it overly corny, I actually found Captain Quark's narration in the 2016 remake to be hilarious. I know many of you found it cringy, so perhaps I am in the minority, but I didn't find myself chuckling out loud as much in Rift Apart as in the past entry. The writing was still solid for what it needed to be, I just don't recall many times I laughed out loud. The overall story really boils down to Clank's gifting of the Dimensionator to Ratchet going awry, and the protagonist trying to fix the situation. There are some side plots involving Ratchet pondering searching for other Lombaxes, especially after crossing paths with Rivet, but nothing that runs tremendously deep. That's okay though, as the game didn't require a deep story. There were some nice moments and lessons, however, particularly Rivet's forgiveness of Kit for taking her arm. Their dynamic and interactions were definitely some of the best moments, story-wise, in the game. The writers did well including some scenes like this, while still keeping the game light and fun as it's meant to be. There are a few mechanics I was hoping for along the way, or a couple of things I thought Insomniac could have added to really put the game over the top. One that I couldn't help get out of my mind pretty much from the time Rivet was introduced was to be able to simultaneously combat with Ratchet at the same time, perhaps in function similar to how you could switch seamlessly between team members in the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Being that the combat is obviously completely different in Ratchet and Clank, this would have most likely brought too many technical changes and fluidity problems during the fights, but I thought it would have been cool to run to one part of the map with Ratchet, start shooting, then switch to Rivet on the opposite side with another weapon to complement Ratchet. Perhaps this would have been a larger undertaking to implement than possible, or just not the direction Insomniac wanted to go. While the Rift mechanic was a welcome addition and added a nice touch to combat, I thought it might be cool if Ratchet and Rivet could have a mechanic, perhaps where they could create their own rift in battle, place somewhere strategically, and then call on it later in the fight. Again, perhaps that would have created a domino effect of other problems for the developers, but I think this would have been a lot of fun for more creative players. In coming full circle, there's one more highlight I'd like to touch on. An example of the ridiculous capabilities and future potential of the PS5's hardware was on display on the planet Blazar Prime, where striking the Blazon led to near instantaneous change in level on a pretty large scale. This mechanic opened up a number of level design possibilities, and I can't wait to see how this functionality is built upon in later games. The mechanic really reminded me of the later stage in Titanfall 2, where you can warp in and out of time and space, which changes the area, but this felt like a whole new level. Anyways, this mechanic definitely made Blazar one of the more memorable areas in the game. In terms of this power as well, there were certain points in the game, especially in Nefarious City, where I couldn't believe how many assets were on the screen at the same time and how far the draw distances were without dropping any frames and the resolution still looking gorgeous. Just absolutely amazing and a true technical accomplishment in gaming. I hope everyone enjoyed my review. My next video will most likely be about either Demon's Souls or Resident Evil Village, as I'd like to hit on the PS5 releases, including Returnal and Miles Morales as well, before delving back into the PS4 library of fantastic releases. I will definitely be covering Nintendo Switch games also, as well as any other fantastic games that may come up. If you're looking for Soulsborne specific content, check out my channel, Ghost Riposte, linked below. I hope everyone has an awesome day and a good time gaming out there. Peace.